All right, I'm Paul Catalanato, and this is my friend and colleague Hamp Overton. This is 100 Scariest, where we are looking for the scariest short streaming online. Today, we're talking about Pumpkin Guts. I came across this one through an article in Fangoria magazine. So, Pumpkin Guts was directed by Bryan Ferguson with a budget of $800. The film was shown at the 2024 Fantastic Fest and Beyond Fest. According to the article in Fangoria, Ferguson describes the movie as after hours but set on Halloween night and was pitched to 20th Century Fox for their bite sized Halloween season. Ferguson operates out of Glasgow, United Kingdom, where he is a music video director. He's worked for some notable artists, including Garbage. You can find this short and more of his work on Vimeo at Bryan Ferguson. So, Hant, Pumpkin Guts. I have to say
Yeah,
that I absolutely love this one. It's a lot
good.
of fun. Reminds me of everything that I love about 80s horror. In
hmm
many ways, this felt like Sam Raimi to me. I can't wait to hear your opinions because I know you're a Raimi fan, the way he moves the camera, but I'd say the editing is probably a lot tighter than a Raimi production. What do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely obviously a throwback to the 80s because it starts off with the screen saying 1987. So yeah, it's interesting having lived through the 80s and watched first releases of movies like Friday the 13th and Halloween. It's fun to see younger filmmakers go back to the era. I think the biggest start of that was probably with Stranger Things, where that really cemented it in that sort of thing. So yeah, this has it. I saw shades of Halloween. I saw shades of Friday the 13th. And it was also fun viewing his website to see sort of his evolution as a filmmaker and where he is right now. He's very skilled, without a doubt. The story moves along fast. It keeps you entertained. He always sneaks in bits of humor, which is fun. He never takes it too serious. And of course, this is a slasher film, so there's lots of blood and things like that. And so, but it's interesting to see his earlier work where he takes some aspects very seriously, and this one, which is a lot more lighthearted. But it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah,
And
he started doing this because I know he said his wife fell sick and he said music video jobs were drying up. So he did this short to be creative, which is, what you want to hear from a filmmaker.
I was going to
We
say the
always tell
exact
her,
same thing.
yeah,
Yeah,
what you tell your students all the time, filmmakers make movies.
right.
Don't let money stop you from making a movie, which he didn't hear. I
Exactly.
think this movie looks way better than $800, and
Oh,
that's the
absolutely.
thing that
Mhm.
really brought me to this one.
Well, I viewing the credits, although I didn't look at any of the names, it looks like he got a lot of in-kind help with this.
Mhm.
So it's important that when a filmmaker has had the success that he has, where he's making a living, making music videos and doing projects that you're familiar with, he probably has access to cinematographers. He probably has access to sound people. He has access to people that can do post coloration. Of course, much like Sandberg, who we looked at last time, you saw Bryan's name on a lot of parts of this. He's clearly skilled in the post production as well as directing and writing, music, and things like that. So he brings a lot to a project, but I believe he also had a lot of help. And when you've been making films as long as he has, not only does he know the crew, but he also gets to know the acting pool and things of that nature. So this was probably as much of a passion project as it was, anything else. And so he could get a lot of help with this. And I think that's what you see. If you go to any of your favorite actors and look at them, you will see that interspersed with all their big films, there will be less expensive films, and there'll also be shorts. And these shorts are often done by what they might believe are up and coming filmmakers, maybe from a film school or maybe, someone that does music videos. And the idea is that, you help nurture the next generation. And also the thing is that, one of those filmmakers might be a breakout one. And so if you can connect with them at a young age, that gives you other opportunities to work with a good filmmaker.
And you bring up Sandberg, and I think that's a great. I think these two films really make a great pairing. This is one of those other movies that's definitely trying to be a pitch for a feature length movie. He says so even in the article, that he wants to make this into a bigger movie. You can kind of see where this is like, hey, look, this is what I'd like to do on a bigger scale.
Right.
And I think it makes it interesting pairing. This is also good for, like, say, students who might be getting ready to do a thesis too. Because you get a little bit more money, you get a little bit more crew. This movie, and on that same note, this is also why I really champion film school. Because you put yourself in a situation where you're making movies and you're with other people who want to make movies, i.e., kind of what you're describing right here. This guy's making music videos, he's meeting people, you're talking, hey, I got this idea, you want to help me out? Oh, that sounds fun. Let's get together for a weekend, make the movie. That's pretty much what film school is, except for you get a grade instead of in
Right.
favors, right? So this movie to me, and especially if you pair it with, Lights Out, these are the kind of movies that I like students to look at.
But yeah, you're right. And on the note that you mentioned is, getting working with younger people, not to berate the film school thing is, but everyone is eager to build their reel also. And Bryan clearly brings experience. And if someone is maybe a young, eager to learn, eager to, earn some more credits and things like that, this is a great film to get on the reel. And so it's a great way to, collect new people that might be in production design or actors or lighters or sound people, sound design, the whole nine yards, all those things right there. Because you're always building on things like this. And this would be a great one to have on your reel, as I mentioned.
Hmm. I tell you, I think back to film school. I always watch feature length movies. I wish I would have watched more shorts when I was in film school. I look at these shorts now, and I've really grown to love short films. And I don't know if that's because I've gotten more into education or I make more short films because of the Vintage 8 channel. But like I've really you you said it last week. Shorts really are just a different animal than a feature length movie. You just can't. Yes, they're made with cameras and sound. They're made similarly, but they really need to be tackled in a different way.
They do. A short still has, for the most part, the three act structure, right? Like this one, it starts off, it introduces our character, the environment. They say what time of year it is. They tell us it's Halloween. She's a babysitter. She's, working in the house. She's complaining. And then they start talking about the situation where, some people are missing. And then what happens? There's a knock at the door. And that's basically the end of your first act going into your second act. Um, and then, of course, at the end, does she succeed? Well, I assume everyone's seen the film if they're watching this. So she doesn't succeed in the task of surviving the pumpkin. Yeah, it follows that. It's just more truncated, and this is a little bit longer for a short. It's 13 minutes. I think the last one we looked at was less than 2 minutes. Is that right? So when you
It's
do it,
definitely less than 3 minutes. I'd have to check.
yeah, it's pretty short. When you have a short that's 2 minutes long and you got to get right, you pretty much lose your first act, and the whole thing is just the second act. But this one could stretch it out. It had more breathing room, and they did that. They spent a couple 3 minutes doing the first act, and then the second act's pretty large, and then of course the final one. They even have what do they call it? An epilogue at the end, a denouement. Am I pronouncing that correct? Um, but which comes after your third act, like what's happening now, and it's the protagonist's pictures on the milk carton, and that's sort of like moving on to future events or something like that. So yeah, so yeah, you're right about the short films have to have their own structure. They got to move a lot faster too. But this one, because it's a little bit longer, allows you to follow a more traditional three-act structure than maybe a really fast one.
One of the things I used to like, our old mentor Steve Hank. I know nobody, maybe a few people watching might know who that is, but you and I definitely know who that is. One of the things I remember him telling me in my first semester, he was like, "Yeah, in feature length movies, a scene has to do one thing, one thing." He goes, "But when you're making a short film, that scene better do three things. It needs to
I
do
could
three
see that.
things if
Yeah.
you're making a short."
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, you got to get a lot of information in there. I mean, think about a feature film. It allows you to tell you the place. It allows you to tell the time. It introduces characters. It gives a theme. All that kind of stuff can happen in in 30 minutes. You get 30 minutes to share all that information. Who's our hero? What's going on around here? And in a short, you have 3 minutes to do that. So you got to cram a lot of stuff in there really fast. But
You
this
know,
is good. This is he not only does that, but he also really creates the environment. I know it's a fascination with I mentioned this again and again and again. The fascination with 80s horror films is really popular amongst or has been, I shouldn't say now, but has been for quite some time. And he does a great job of that. And I think one of the best things is how do you make it 1987? You tell the audience that. And so that's an easy way of doing it. And then you have some production design, but things are off, like her portable phone. Having grown up in the 80s, the only portable phones that worked were the ones with the antennas you got to pull out like that. And she's using a more contemporary one. But she's got those great 80s glasses on and things like that, and all the little LED pumpkin lights. You didn't have those in the 80s. Those are more contemporary thing, but it really does create the environment. And her bike looks like it's 1980s. So as long as they have some things that are, kind of sealing the deal for the most part, it works. So it's fun. It makes for a great environment at that time. And of course, all the great horror films, as we mentioned, came out in the 80s. Well, I should say the great horror films. That concept of the slasher, even though they began in the 70s, really with your Texas Chainsaw Massacres and the first Halloween, they really had their their heyday in the 80s when you had all your Nightmare on Elm Streets, et cetera, and all the Halloweens and all the Friday the 13th and all those ones that came out and all the knockoffs variations of this too. So great
few of
period
the
for horror film.
podcasts I listen to, they say the modern slasher begins with Psycho. There's like that is where it starts and sprouts from there.
I could see that. Because you have the crazy person who's doing it. Yeah, we should talk about that. That film's interesting too, just by itself.
There are a lot of things in Psycho that are very interesting.
Hmm
A lot
hmm
of things. Well, let's hit the cinematography, Hamp. I know we can't do we can't do a show without letting you hit. How did it look? What did you think about the look?
I think it looked great. And of course, it would be difficult to make a film like this back in the 80s because the technology wasn't there. I shouldn't say that. I mean, if you're a really good cinematographer, you could have pulled off some of this stuff, but it was very hard to light a scene with Christmas lights back in those days because you were shooting on film stock. The only video stock available, HD really wasn't a thing at this time. Maybe HD video had just started coming out, but that would be in very high-end television productions. So all of your video production was still being done on standard definition and done on, at least in America, they was done at 30 frames per second. So it had that really video feel.
Mhm.
Think about, sitcoms in the 70s. I'm sorry, the lower budget sitcoms in the 80s were shot on video. Your higher budget ones were still shot in film. So they could do a lot of stuff today that you probably couldn't get away with back in those days. For example, in this one, she rides across what I guess 6 blocks to the neighborhood's house, right? I'm guessing there were no lights added by the production as she rode her bicycle at night. You couldn't have done that in the 80s. The cameras just weren't sensitive enough. So you'd have to break out lighting gear. You'd have to light that street, all that kind of good stuff. Again, it just wasn't possible. But today, you rent a camera and you bump up your ISO to 1600 or 3200, and you can easily shoot under street lights. Okay? I did notice that when she was on her bike that her her light was almost blue and the street lights were yellow.
Mm.
Um, that blue light means it's an LED light. And so not to give it away and be nitpicky, but back in the 80s, they didn't have LED bicycle lights. They only had the tungsten bicycle lights, and it would have as you pedal, the brightness increases and then it decreases and it increases.
Yeah.
So she clearly had an LED bicycle light on there. Spoiler alert. So
Coming from someone who's with from the 80s, right? I was a kid in the 80s, so a lot of this stuff I don't remember.
yeah, yeah. I really want to try and get a good look at her bicycle too to see if it really was an 80s bicycle. Of course, in the US, it would have been a Schwinn. That's what everyone had was a Schwinn. And then Huffy was another one that came out, and I'm not sure what bicycle they had in England at that time. But Anyway, so lots of stuff like that. So cinematography wise, they could do stuff in this film that you there would be on an $800 budget that probably would have been impossible to have done. Um, $800 you couldn't have even bought the film and developed it for $800,
True.
back in those days because you had to shoot on film.
Oh,
So
that's
yeah,
it. We busted the budget. Here's the film stock. Well, we can't. That's
yeah.
it.
For my thesis, I spent $5,000 on film alone, just on film. And
Yeah.
I luckily I had a grant from Kodak, which was nice. But it's just like, it's so expensive. And today, I have students come to me all the time. I know we're doing a kind of a sidebar here, but students want to shoot on film. They want the experience of shooting on film. And I said, sure, we have film cameras. And then I say, this is how much it's going to cost. You have to buy the film. You have to buy the film. You have to ship it off to a lab. It has to be developed. That's another cost. And then it has to be transferred. That's another cost. And so when you look at it, one roll of Kodak film is probably $300, and that's a 400-foot roll of 16 millimeter film, and that's going to give you 11 minutes worth of footage. So $400 just to buy the film. Okay, so you pay $400 for an 11 minutes worth of film, and now you got to ship it off and get it developed. Okay, and that's going to be X number of dollars per cent. I mean, per foot. So it's usually like 20 cents for development per foot. And then you got to get it transferred. And that's usually done on a half hour or an hour basis. And it might be $600 for an hour, or I haven't done it in a while because everything's done on video these days. So it becomes very expensive very fast. And students usually decide, maybe I won't. Or what they will do is uh they'll shoot on black and white because that's cheaper. And Kodak hasn't come out with a new black and white film since the 70s. So it's still the same recipe and the same stuff they're cranking out since then. So that's still pretty cheap, that stuff. But it doesn't look, I mean, I was about to say it doesn't look great, but if that's the look you're going for, I guess it does look great. But a lot of movies that want to capture black and white, what they would do is they would shoot on color and transfer to black and white because the film stocks were newer. They had better resolution. They had better exposure. They had better latitude. And so you get a much better image, and then you just transfer it in black and white in post. But if you don't, if that doesn't bother you, then yeah, who cares?
You know, two things go through my mind. It's like one, Hamp on a thesis committee is like, this doesn't look 80s enough to me. You must redo this movie. But like, but another thing is though, it's one of those things whenever you do choose a different era, like when you say, okay, well, I'm going to shoot this and I'm going to make it like the 60s or the 70s or 80s,
Sure.
you always do run the risk if somebody was there and they have a hand of knowledge of that period. I don't remember that in that period. You do run the risk of that.
You do look at movies, even period piece movies. It's fun to go into IMDb and read the comments, and they'll say, or usually it's under what is it, errors or trivia or something like that on IMDb page, and they'll say, that car came out in 1967, and this film's supposed to take place in 1965. Yeah. So there's all sorts of things you really got to pay attention to when you do a period piece.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. You mean there are no planes in Gladiator? That was a mistake?
Exactly.
Another touch that I did like too on this movie in cinematography wise, I liked the orange. Like whenever they were inside, it was always
Hmm.
orange like a pumpkin.
Sure, absolutely. The whole thing was orange, right? It was a strong orange film, and I think it accomplished two things. One, it supported the story, but the other thing is it gives it more of a nostalgic look when you kind of sepia color things, that type of
Hmm.
stuff, kind of orange it up like that. Plus, it obviously supports the Halloween theme that this whole film and the idea of pumpkins. I'm curious, Paul, why is it called pumpkin guts when the monster is called pumpkin pincher?
It's a good question. I wasn't able to find that either. I don't know if that was written somewhere.
My conclusion was that pumpkin guts they thought was a better title than pumpkin pincher.
Might be worth me looking up later, and then I can flash it at the bottom. The idiots didn't know at the time, but I assumed if I had to say, I assumed because she ended up inside the pumpkin at the end, right? Because like
Is
her
that what you
ear's
got?
right there, so I assumed the pumpkin ate her. I really did, and she ended up
Ah,
in.
right. Because it wanted the ear. And it's very impatient of the pumpkin, I thought. I mean, she had she's shoving it in, and it's saying, sorry, that's not, and why'd she put it in a container? I didn't understand why she put it in a Tupperware container. And I got to point out that that was a contemporary cup Tupperware container, not a 1986 Tupperware container. So I was a little upset that the pumpkin was too impatient and why she just didn't toss the earpiece in there in the first place. There was lots of things. This is horror films and actually a lot of movies do this where Becky has to be proactive for the story to work, right? Okay, so the
Mhm.
first act, she's on her phone with her friend who's been grounded, and Becky has is babysitting, and so the first thing that has to happen is that the child she's babysitting has to be completely out of the picture, okay? Taking care of herself, even puts herself to sleep, and then we learn all this information, and then there's a knock at the door, and it's Halloween night, and I'm kind of curious that there are no trick-or-treaters. Even when she bicycles down the road, there are no trick-or-treaters. They don't exist anywhere. Even though her friend says, "Oh, it's probably trick-or-treaters," and so she has to want to go to the door. She looks out the window. She doesn't see anything. So again, she has to be proactive, right? This has to work. So she has to open the door. So she opens the door and then she sees the pumpkin. Okay, she sees the pumpkin. Now she knows about all this horror stuff. Why does she bring the pumpkin inside? But she she has to make it work, right? And so, but what's interesting is that I didn't have all these thoughts uh when I watched it the first time. It's not until you go back and you start watching it, and to me, that's what makes this film good, is that the filmmaker Bryan does a great job in just keeping it going that you
Mhm.
don't pause to think about, well, wait, why did she bring the pumpkin in? She knows about the legend of this pumpkin. She knows that it happens on Halloween night. She was even afraid of the door. Um, but in order for the movie to work, at least the way it's written, she has to be naively proactive. And he's a good enough filmmaker to let you buy it when you watch it, that it makes sense that she's doing all this kind of stuff. When you go back and look at it again, you go, wait a minute, but I think it's great, and then
Well,
she has to go. Mhm.
well, no, I think one of the reasons it works is because he does story-wise, he does a very brilliant thing that the friend on the phone is dumping the exposition.
Absolutely,
And
that's a
that's
great
what's
trick.
brilliant about that opening scene. She's
Mhm.
dumping the exposition, so it's not coming from our main character. She's telling us the rules in this very panicked way, like, "Oh my God, my name's not on there, is it?" So she's also included in the story, dumping the exposition, so we forget when, like when our main character naively brings it in. You don't ask that question because you're focused on that exposition.
Why do you think you did it that way?
Well, absolutely. Well, for number one way, it's always terrible when the main character delivers exposition.
Sure. And I was thinking that it's better that the main character is alone, right? This is a horror
Hmm.
film. And that's your classic horror film, is get the person who's vulnerable. And in the 80s horror movies, it's always a young female, okay? And you get them alone. And then you release the monster on them. That's the classic trope. Then you see it in everything from like Aliens, the first Aliens, where Sigourney Weaver's in there and she's trapped on a spaceship alone, and they release the monster on her. Okay. And then in Halloween, it's interesting because they're in a city. How can you be alone in a town? But like what they do in this film is they don't show you anyone else. Okay.
Hmm.
There's no police. The adults don't show up until the very end of the film. And so it appears as though she's all by herself except for the phone conversation she's having with her friend. Um,
And a little kid in the other room. But the thing is too, and it also does even another thing that you and I were talking about earlier. It keeps it fast.
keeps it going. Absolutely.
Everything's happening within 2 or 3 minutes. Within 3 minutes, you know the rules. We know she's alone, and we knows what she has to do. We even know what the stakes are, and that's
Yes.
all done within the first 3 minutes. And then you get this great breakout when it jumps to the credit scene, which normally in shorts I can take or leave the credit scene, but the credit scene in that where it does the Halloween 3 intro, I was like. I could watch that about 3 or 4 times and enjoy it every time. So, like that was just solid, and it really pumped me up and thrusted me into the
Yeah.
rest of the narrative. But you know,
and it
That's
frees you
that
to,
was what I thought was the genius about the opening movie in terms of the friend on the phone. And you know what's cool too? He comes back to it at the end. She calls her
Mhm.
back. So when it doesn't work, we get somebody reacting to it. It's not just her there reacting in silence. The friend is there
Yes. And
basically
that,
voicing what we're saying.
right. And the friend being on the phone means that she's alone, but also from a production standpoint, that's one less actor you have to have on front of the camera. And so from a budgetary purpose, it's great having her on the phone. You know, that's so much cheaper than having someone else in front of the camera that now needs wardrobe, they need makeup, you got to feed them lunch, all these, you got to get more coverage, all this kind of stuff that could be happening. And it works very well for the film. So it really is a great, I'm so glad you brought that up because it really does. It's such a great tool that he used and he used it so well.
Absolutely. And and I also love he really did wear his Raimi on his sleeve in this one. I love when he's tapping into Raimi-esque,
Hmm.
cinematography. I really thought it sung, especially with, the way he used, what was that, an electric knife? You know, I gotta be honest with you, I didn't see the mistake coming. Like, when she's a little too zealous with the knife and she ends up dispatching that guy, that she overpowers that guy too. I,
That's
that's
true.
something else I caught
How'd
on
she
the third
overpower
watch. It
that
was
guy?
like, how did she overpower that guy?
I wondered that too. And then it's an electric knife, but she never plugs it in.
Yeah, it's true. She does. Maybe it was battery operated.
Not 1986.
Not 1986.
Plus, you can see the cord when she first pulls it out of the pumpkin.
Oh,
The cord is very clear there. That it's a corded knife. That would be funny if it was an electric knife in a pumpkin. It just doesn't. See, this is, I think, is his dark sense of humor is is covered in pumpkin stuff. And she pulls
pumpkin
it out.
guts.
Pumpkin guts, and she's just like horrified, but it's so over the top. And you can see this in some of his other work too, where he has fun with the genre. Did you watch Earworm with that one, that
Mhm.
short of his, over the top right there. And then some of his other ones where he would just go completely over the top. His very first one, the one with the what was it called on his website? The Misbehavior of Polly Papercut, and how she locks herself in the trunk by accident.
Mhm.
He has a very funny dark sense of humor, and he sneaks it in there quite often, which is, to me, it's a lot of fun, because you're wrapped up in it. And again, that's a Sam Raimi thing also, where if you look at the Evil Deads and Bruce Campbell, the hero in all these movies, he always gets sprayed in the face with blood. He's always,
Mhm.
it's almost like Sam Raimi is gleefully excited to to blast his hero in the face with more blood every any chance he can get. So yeah, definitely, I think you're right. This is so much a Sam Raimi thing. It's interesting you brought that up because looking at his other stuff, I was looking at his influences were David Cronenberg, especially the Pumpkin. The if you look at his other films, he's very much into body mutilation and things of that nature. That's a very David Cronenberg thing. And here she's got to cut her own ear off. And that's the theme also. If you he made another short where a woman cut someone's ear off. So this filmmaker likes to chop ears off. That's the kind of a thing he has going on there. And some of his other films, Darren Aronofsky, I felt was prevalent in some of his other filmmaking things. Definitely John Carpenter, getting tips from Halloween and things like that. And even I mentioned if you look at, it's not really seen in this film, but in his other stuff, he really loves the color palettes like Wes Anderson. He really looks into um, I'll call flat space versus deep space. But I think what makes this guy a great filmmaker is that although he has what he favors, he's able to adopt a different film style, which
Mhm.
I think he did for this film. Um, he obviously went back and looked at a lot of these 80s films and things like that and adopted those styles.
I
And
agree.
to me, that's he has a signature style, but he also is able to almost be a chameleon in his filmmaking, which is really, really great. And I'm surprised that he is not making more stuff. maybe the market where he lives in Scotland isn't big enough to accommodate, more filmmakers. I'm not sure, but he really is talented and he should be making more things.
I find it hard to believe that this will not one day be a feature-length movie.
Well,
This one,
certainly, yeah. Or if nothing else, I mean, maybe that period has passed, your Stranger Things period. I'm trying to think, have there been any more recent? Because to me, when I think about the Netflix or the Amazon, where they're making more of these, these serial things, they seem to be a little more. We went through a dark period for the past 10 years where if you look at like the three body problem and things like that, where they, these they're more modern, they're more contemporary, but they're also very dark.
mhm.
Um, and I'm not sure if there's still a market for this. I think maybe as a population, we've kind of moved on beyond the retro 80s films, and maybe we're looking at 90s now coming up, will be retro 90s stuff. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. We'll have to see. I'm not
Mm.
sure if it's been played out, that whole 80s experience has been played out.
The good news is what is old is new again. He wouldn't have to wait long for the 80s to be back in vogue again. Things, I
Or
find
if you
things move very quickly now. Things are in a much faster time pace. You know,
and if you made something really good, it really doesn't matter when you make it. It's gonna work. Yeah.
no, absolutely. One thing I will tell you I really did love is the moment when, like, give it your own ear and her face. When there's a look on that actor's face where it's like, this was going no other way than her chopping her own ear off. You know what I mean? It's like, yes, we're going to do this.
Yes. He also
Um,
has.
Go
Mhm.
ahead.
I noticed that he has a penchant for disabilities too. Ears obviously is another thing, but wearing glasses. He had uh the the hearing aid, and he's done that in some. I'm trying to remember what was the other films that he did that, and he has a pattern of that. Oh, in this movie itself, when she's looking through the yearbook, there's the guy with the eye patch on.
Mm,
Yeah, so
yeah.
so again, he kind of has this pattern where he likes to find people with these disabilities or the afflictions, that sort of thing.
Other than that, I mean, I thought the cinematography worked. The editing,
Mhm.
I did compare it to, or we've compared it to Raimi, but I will say I think the editing is tighter than a Raimi movie. I think that's his music video influence coming in,
I think
makes
you're
it a
right.
lot tighter.
Well, Sam Raimi is really big on stretching out those moments to the nth degree,
Hmm.
almost overboard, and you can see that everything from his very first Evil Dead movies to the Spider-Man films he makes, where he just really stretches those moments out where Spider-Man's trying to stop the streetcars from going off, and it goes on and on
Yeah.
and on. It almost wears out his welcome. It goes on for so long. Yeah. But yeah, absolutely with the Sam Raimi and lots of blood. Um like the dark comedy, which you see in Sam Raimi movies all the time, definitely. So he really did a great job in I think he's a fan of 80s horror films, but he certainly did his research and it shows in this piece here.
Yeah, it's kind of like a blender of all the 80s directors that you were talking about. Darren
Yeah.
Aronofsky would be the only one that wouldn't be an 80s contemporary, you know?
Yeah, and some of those names I mentioned, I saw in some of his other work, not necessarily this film here, but yeah, remember he did that black and white film that was,
Hmm.
he shot during COVID, and I thought about Darren Aronofsky's early film also, and his editing style, and is toned down in this film, but if you remember things like, Requiem for a Dream and in those other films, he has this very rapid chop, 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 chop,
Yeah.
and you show you what happens, especially if it's something that's being repeated, and you can see that Bryan here does that in some of his other films, although I did not see it really done in this film, but he goes into that sort of pattern that I see a lot in Darren Aronofsky's films.
Yeah, those metric montages.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Among other things that you can see in there. I'm looking at my notes here to see if I can find out what else I noted here.
One of the things I did notice on watching this was at the end. The first time through, I didn't notice this, but how unfair the pumpkin is. You brought that up earlier, but I kind of thought, like, the pumpkin set these rules up
And then lies.
and then lies. And then, she goes to this house and it's not even the person she's supposed to get the ear from. And, like, on the second time, that took me out of it because I was trying to think, was like, well, did the pumpkin make a mistake? Or is that the game? Was she never going to succeed? Is that the horror of it? The first time through, I was like, wow, that was a great twist. Like, oh, it's not even a right person. She's obviously screwed. But then the second time I was through, it kind of made me think, well, what? It made me ask more of the rules. Like, what
Right.
is the pumpkin after here? I mean,
Mhm.
did it want her the whole time? Did it want him, but he was lucky he moved? You know what I'm saying? And look, it's a short film and he doesn't have a chance to answer this question, but it did make me wonder what what was the purpose of that? What was the purpose? What was his intention in with that twist?
You felt a little cheated.
Yeah, a little bit.
Because
Second
yeah,
time.
because you were told this is the principle, and the pumpkin is not the pumpkin's not following it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's
And
like
you're
he
right,
almost
you're
he
right.
broke his rule.
And
It's
that's
almost like he broke his rules. You know,
exactly. And that's the important thing is that a filmmaker doesn't have to follow the rules of reality, but they do have to follow the rules of their own cinematic universe that they've created. And what you're saying is that it looks like he wasn't doing that. And so that can be disappointing. Yeah. Mhm.
I mean, did you agree? That was the only thing I noticed
Absolutely.
on repeat viewings.
Absolutely. I felt like she went overboard to try and make the pumpkin happy.
She made the electric knife work.
She did. And she cut off that guy's ear and then she cut off her own ear and she was fed the wrong address. All these things, it was like it was designed to make her fail. And it's like, well, that's not right, you know? And then randomly shows up on someone's doorstep. Yes, exactly. So, but I guess if you think about, think about a movie like The Ring, where you're given the VHS tape and you watch it and you have X amount of time to find it. Did that always follow the rules? Do you remember?
I mean, I'm thinking about the first Ring, and it does follow its own rules. I know, like when we get to these sequels, and they sometimes start tweaking
Right,
the
sure.
rules, but
Hmm.
and just in this one short, I couldn't help but like I said, when I watched it a couple of more times, I kept coming back to that one point. It was one of the most fun things the first time I watched it because it was like, oh well, she's done for now. But like I said, the more times I watched it, the more I started asking questions. It's like, well, why? Well, why not? If it was a Sam Raimi movie, he probably would have got his ears burned off, and they wouldn't have been. It wouldn't have been any good. And he'd be like, oh, now what I'm gonna do? She should have put both ears in there, two for one.
I thought she did a commendable job in cutting one ear off. Now you're
So,
saying she should put a second one in there.
so what you're saying is the pumpkin was too unfair.
Exactly. The pumpkin said he had rules, or she, and the pumpkin did not follow those rules.
So what did you think of the pumpkin prop, Hamp?
I thought it was great, and it reminded me a lot of John Carpenter's The Thing, where the legs all shoot out. If you remember, if you saw that movie, the monster was inside the dog, and then it was inside the man, and very John Carpenter-ish, and lots of gross stuff and things like that, and the legs came out. So I think that's one of the other great filmmakers that he was borrowing from. And then also there was one other thing I want to mention is the when he drags the victim off into the darkness at the very end when she gets dragged off, that reminded me a lot of horror movies do that. And I most recently saw it when I watched Willy's Wonderland with Nicolas Cage in it. And they do that in that movie there also.
You know, I'm a sucker for that. I love it when they pull them into the darkness like that.
Mhm.
It always makes me think like one of the things you said last time was it looks like the real world, but it's not quite the real world, what we're showing. Because like there's no way you wouldn't be able to see where they were being dragged to. Oh, there they go down the long hallway, right? But it's
Exactly.
fun in a movie because they get drug into the darkness, it's like you get the sense that she's no longer in this world anymore. She's drug off into the to whatever
Yeah.
into the pumpkin guts.
Hmm. Hmm.
So a few of the comments. I always like looking at comments. That's one of my favorite things about online, watching shorts online. It's just, what other people are saying. If you look in the Vimeo comments, High Caliber Films wrote, "This is motivating, great job for real. I got to
Hmm.
get started," which I do like because this is that kind of short movie. You watch this, yes, it makes you want to go make a movie yourself. Someone else said to me, "This is the biggest compliment." Oh no, that was his reply. He replied to me, "This is the biggest compliment a creator can be paid when it comes to doing a short," which I do agree. Then a Megan said, "Great work, love the practical effects." And then finally, Rob Monday mentioned that the world needs more of the pumpkin pincher, which I agree. I'll be honest with you. I do agree that we need more.
I just like to see more work from this filmmaker. He has talent, and I love his dark sense of humor, and I really love his dramatic pieces too. Did you watch the one about the? This is why I mentioned David Cronenberg in the one about the man that wanted his arm cut off,
Hmm.
and that reminded me a lot of Crash and some other self-mutilation type films. And it was really it was a very interesting film. In I don't want to sidetrack here, but it would be nice to see this filmmaker make some more feature length film as well as more shorts. He's got a lot of
No, I
talent.
agree. I caught his music video that he did for Garbage with the Day Vampires, and I thought it was great. So I'm definitely a fan. That is no doubt about that. So that's it for Pumpkin Guts. So do we think it's one of the best horror shorts out there? One of the scariest? I think it's a good contender. Is it one of the best? I don't know. I guess, well, once we watch a few more and compare it to some of the others, maybe we'll get a better idea. What do you think?
I think I'm in the same category. I like the film, but again, we've just started, so we have to see what else is out there. But I would like to say that I would like to see more work from this filmmaker. I think he's great, very talented.
So, what are we doing next time, Hamp?
Next time we're gonna watch a short. I think it's all done in one take called Night of the Slasher.
That's a good one. I like that short film. All right. Well, that's it for 100 Scariest. See you next time when we talk about Night of the Slasher. I'm Paul. This is Ham. And we'll see you next time. Like, subscribe, share, and leave us a comment. Have a movie we should cover? Let us know.